Taxonomy usually deals with subspecies and species. A species in general is a group of birds or populations of birds that would naturally interbreed and produce a like kind. In other words, it's a group of birds that, as they reproduce over hundreds and thousands of years, they stay as a homogeneous taxonomic unit. Subspecies are generally divisions within a species that would freely interbreed if they were together and mix and end up becoming less and less different. In other words, they would just merge together into a species if they were together occupying the same place. It's really important for conservation, especially, as well as for research and ornithology, to understand what groups of birds are species and what groups of birds are subspecies. So I end up sending out or keeping track of the species in the West Indies. And there's birds like the Antillean mango or the lesser Antillean peewee, or the loggerhead kingbird, which occupy multiple islands. And because they occupy different islands, they don't overlap. So there's no scientific way to look at those two groups and see if they were together, would they interbreed or would they stay separate, right? In other words, would they end up coming together into a single population, or would they stay segregated and only breed with the like kind, which is really the definition of a species or a biological species concept. So because they don't overlap, because you have an Antillean mango in Puerto Rico and an Antillean mango on the Dominican Republic and Hispaniola, they don't overlap, so there's no way to tell if they would interbreed or not. So instead of that, what scientists do is they look at vocalizations, they look at the genetic history of these two groups. They look at morphometrics like color and breeding season, and they look at a wide variety of things to try to figure out what's the likelihood that these things are truly a different species, or are they subspecies of the same species. And so there's a group at the AOS, and we're here at the AOS meeting. There's a group within the AOS called the North American Checklist Committee, and they review the scientific literature that is published throughout the year or over the years to try to help make those decisions on whether two groups like the Antillean mango on Hispaniola and the Antillean mango in Puerto Rico, whether those are actually two different species or are they truly one species as they're treated today. And the process there is scientists, researchers, bird enthusiasts, anyone can actually put together a proposal to split a species into multiple species, and then submit that proposal to the checklist committee. One of the important things about that is every year there are a number of proposals in the Caribbean that we want to write, or that many of us would like to submit. But generally one of the requirements is there's published data. In other words, data or information published in a peer-reviewed journal to help support that split. So someone might do a vocalization Someone might do a vocalization study on the lesser Antillean peewee or the loggerhead kingbird and realize that they sound very different from island to island. And that might be enough of a difference to keep them from interbreeding if they were actually mixed together. So someone could do a quantitative analysis, really lay out what are the differences in the vocalizations, publish that information, and then somebody else could take that information, put it into a proposal, and actually propose to the NACC to split that species. So every year this committee will review the proposals, and proposals are usually submitted sometime by March, April. That committee then reviews those proposals, votes on them, and announces the results of that work sometime in July, usually. And then the AOS publishes a supplement to the checklist of birds sometime in August or September. So it's an annual process. So people try to review the new literature every year to try to better understand how all of these birds are related. So that committee has a very hard job to do because they are looking at the evidence that's presented in that proposal to try to determine if they think if those two populations were together, would they interbreed and intermix, or would they stay separated? And there's a number of factors that they look at depending on the group of birds. Some birds are very vocal oriented. Other kinds of birds are very plumage oriented. So it's a combination of looking at the vocal differences, plumage differences, and the genetic history of the two or more groups. And then that committee has to make a judgment call on whether those things should be multiple species or not. Often there are groups of species that, or groups of subspecies that may not get split for years. And generally that's because there's not enough definitive evidence yet in the published literature to warrant that split. And more information, the more information that we can gather in the field, the more information that gets published about the differences, the more likely it is that those species will get split and add to the endemic list of Puerto Rico or other regions in the West Indies. So one of the interesting thing about birds is they're very well studied over a very long history. And because they are well studied, there's a lot of different groups around the world who are thinking about different aspects of the birds. And an offshoot of that is the fact that there are 3 or 4 major groups who are thinking about the taxonomy and the phylogeny and you know, what birds should be species and what birds should be subspecies. The AOS, because they are one of the largest groups in the Americas, has traditionally been the authority for birds in the Western Hemisphere. There are other groups around the world who have also focused on a region and really kind of guided the taxonomy within a region, like Africa or Australia. And then there are several other groups like Clements in conjunction with the Lab of Ornithology and eBird. There's the IOU, the International Ornithological Union, I think it is, and BirdLife International. All 3 of those groups publish a global taxonomy or a global list of birds. And they often will rely on those more regional experts like the AOS or the group in Australia or the group in Africa to make those local decisions around the birds that they really know well or they cover in their region. Because with over 10,000 species of birds, it's very difficult to keep up with everything and all the new literature that's coming out. There is an interesting effort going on now because we're in a situation where we do have 3 or 4 global bird taxonomies, but there's an effort going on to consolidate those and bring those down to one, which would help reduce the confusion around some groups treat something as a species, some groups treat the Puerto Rican mango as a species of Puerto Rico. Other groups might treat it as a subspecies of Antillean mango, which just generates confusion in not only the birding community, but throughout the ornithological community itself. So that effort, I'm crossing my fingers, will continue, and we hope to have something out in the next 2 years or so that's going to bring those groups together and maybe bring some order to the chaos that is currently bird taxonomies.